A wise man once asked the question, how can what we know about the past influence the future? There are many ways that this question can be approached, but from my perspective, this question at heart is really about making mistakes. You see, mistakes, while they can be tragic, heartbreaking, and painful, are one of the coolest parts about being a human being. And that's because we get to learn from them, and hopefully, if we're wise and lucky enough, make decisions that can make our lives better. Perhaps this is why history classes exist, other than, of course, making sure that this guy, Mr. Crandall, has a job. Over the course of human history, people have made some pretty serious mistakes. Of course, I'm not referring to this picture itself. From Benedict Arnold, the most infamous traitor in U.S. history, to Christopher Columbus, who first encountered the Native Americans and decided that, without a doubt, they must be Indians, we've seen some people do some pretty ridiculous stuff. Some of it is kind of funny, though. For instance, a lot of people think that Des Moines, Iowa was named having something to do with monks. But in reality, it was actually named after a silly Native American translation error. Some French dudes asked a native what the name of the river that flowed through this area was, and the native replied, Moingana, which basically means poop face in their language. The French guys liked the way that it sounded, and adapted it to a French word, and voila, they had Des Moines. And I sort of like having to think about them renaming everything in their town like Poop Face Public Schools. But, on the other hand, some of our mistakes aren't really that funny. After the Civil War, which some 8th graders have argued may have been somewhat of a mistake itself, entire state governments gave into and even supported the KKK because of fear, ignorance, and just plain bigotry. On an even larger scale, though, entire populations of people allowed the Holocaust to happen in their own backyards in Germany. But we can learn. The famous Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., whose central slogan is Never Again, was created with the sole purpose of educating the world about genocide so that these types of atrocities don't repeat themselves. Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird with the hopes of putting an end to widespread racism that allowed the KKK to exist in the first place. And look at us. We're still reading it in class today. And then, thinking about books like The Outsiders and Speak in this light, both books were written as warnings to consider both our decisions and the way in which we look at the world and other people. Ponyboy decided to write his book to prevent kids like Dally from going down under streetlights and to prevent people from different groups from being lousy to each other. Laurie Halse Anderson wrote hers in hopes that her readers would be able to avoid the fate of the girl in her nightmares, and to maybe remind us that there is often more than meets the eye to the people that we get to encounter every single day of our lives. So, at the end of the day, mistakes are inherently bad. They're negative. They are mistakes, after all. But that does not mean that we cannot find a silver lining in them. We have to be willing to look deeply at the mistakes that have been made, both by ourselves and by our fellow man. We have to be able and willing to accept them, learn from them, and move forward with our lives by making decisions that coincide with our morals, our values, and our beliefs. And in this way, by paying close attention to our pasts, we have the power to take control of our own lives and decide what our own histories will be. So, I'd like to end this rant with a question or two. How will you learn from your mistakes? Who and what will you vote for when you get the chance? How will you approach that kid who sits alone at lunch in high school next year? Who will be your friend? And how will you respond to your enemies? And finally, and I'll let you take this one or leave this one, but what would Atticus do?